Okay, good morning and thank you for joining this month's GP Tips and Tricks webinar on bank transaction best practices. I'm Dee Bowers and I'll be your moderator. So before we jump in to the presentation, I just want to go over how to use webinar pane. So on the right side of your monitor, you should see an orange arrow. If you click that arrow, you'll be able to toggle the webinar pane between the open and closed position. There's also a small chat window. Please feel free to enter your questions in throughout the presentation. We'll be addressing those at the end of the webinar during our Q&A session as time allows. So right now is also a great time to check your audio settings. If you dialed in on your telephone, please make sure you've selected the Use Telephone option. And if you're dialing in on your computer, please make sure you've selected the Use Mic and Speakers option. One other thing I want to note is that this webinar is being recorded, and we'll be sending out a slide deck with a link to the recording within 48 hours. So if you're interested in watching this again or sharing it with colleagues, please keep an eye out for this email. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and introduce today's presenters. First, we have Megan Fall, who's a senior consultant within our Dynamics GP practice. Megan has over 6 years of experience with Dynamics GP. She's also a Microsoft certified professional in GP financials, supply chain, and implementation. I'm also pleased to introduce Sahar Ahmed, a consultant within our GP practice. She has years of experience supporting and implementing Microsoft Dynamics GP, and is also a Microsoft certified professional in GP financials, inventory, and order processing. So it's great to have you guys both here. And with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Megan.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Today we're going to cover a series of topics in kind of a high-level general overview of the bank transaction and bank reconcile items. The first thing we're going to discuss is the types of bank transactions and how they work. Then we're going to compare miscellaneous transactions to AP checks and manual payments and how those two are used differently. Then we're going to discuss the bank rec tips, and I'm going to give you a quick preview of GP 2013's option for reconciling to the GL for the bank. Okay, so just a quick overview to start. This is how the subledger, the bank, and the GL interact. The arrows just tell you that the subledger, so let's say sales or receivables, sends its data to the bank via the checkbook information and also to the general ledger. However, the bank only sends information to itself for the checkbook and to the general ledger, not backwards to the subledger. So data is going to flow from the subledger to bank and GL, but never backwards. Okay? So just a quick visual to get us in the right frame of reference. Okay, so the first transaction type to discuss is deposits. There are several types of deposits that you can select from. Deposits are created automatically as deposit with receipt, generated from AR, from cash receipt entries, from payables returns, or you can enter them manually in the bank transaction entry window. You can also create a deposit without receipt, and just this note here gives you a quick note on what the difference is between a deposit with receipt and deposit without receipt. Deposit without receipt is entered only from the bank module. It does not post to the GL or to the subledger, so it would be a deposit that's not associated with anything else and should be used primarily as just an adjusting manual entry to the bank. All right, so the next transaction type is the transaction entry window itself. So this is the general bank transaction entry. There are several different types of transactions that you can do. You can enter transactions or receipts. You can void transactions and receipts. And the types of transactions are check, receipt, increase adjustment, decrease adjustment. These are all going to be much more clear in the actual demo. I'm going to show you these individually. This is mostly for reference and just to go over so you know what you're going to be looking at in the demo. So if I'm going very quickly, that's why. Just a quick note, the best practice is only cash transactions should be entered here in the bank module. So if you're doing a cash transaction that does not come from payables or receivables, it needs to be entered in the bank, not through a GL journal entry. because the journal entry, as we saw from our overview visual, does not hit the bank. So you could have an offset then between the checkbook register and the journal entry. So a GL trial balance might show an off balance with the bank. Okay. Then the big one that people tend to get a little unsure about is the miscellaneous checks. Miscellaneous checks does not update payables. It does not have any connection to vendors. Think of it basically as just petty cash expenses. This is if you're paying for a party to be catered and your caterer is not regular, so they're not a vendor. You're just writing a one-off check. You would use the miscellaneous checks if you don't need to keep information about the vendor. Use payables checks or manual payment if you do need to keep track of vendor-related data. So basically what's saying is that if you were to go and look for a miscellaneous check in payables inquiry, you would not find it there. So if you need to track that information, it needs to go through the payables module, which will flow through and hit the bank itself anyway. So it's almost like 90% of things would probably go through payables and only about 10% of things or less would go through miscellaneous checks. Another quick note is that miscellaneous checks does not use the same format as payables checks, especially if you're using McCorma or another check printing application. Miscellaneous checks would use a separate format, so it will not even look the same as your payables check. So if that's an issue as well, you might want to just use the payables checks to be safe. Okay, so moving to the next item, transfers. That's another one that gets people confused. Transfer versus a transaction, the big issue there is that when you're doing a transfer, you're moving cash out of one bank account and into another bank account. So you really want to update both checkbook ledgers or checkbook registries in one go. If you use the bank transaction window, there is only one checkbook selection that you can make. It will let you enter two bank accounts as the account numbers used in the distribution for the transaction, but it will not let you use two checkbooks. So that's just something to keep in mind. Again, it would potentially cause your GL to not match your checkbook for whichever is the offsetting checkbook account number if you were to use a bank transaction. That's why bank transfers are much more straightforward. As you can see, it's a very easy transaction window. You just simply pick the one that you're pulling money out of, and you pick the one that you're putting money into and hit post, and it does it. It's very straightforward. Okay. Bank reconciliation itself. Here's some best practice tips just to keep in mind. For those of you who have never used the GP Bank Rec, this is good introduction. For those of you who are currently using it, just something to keep in mind as you continue forward. So best practices are that you can enter adjustments on the bank reconciliation window itself. Adjustment is an option in bank transaction entry, and that's perfectly fine to use. It's simply very quick and easy to enter an adjustment directly from the bank reconciliation window so that you can have both open at the same time, and it makes things very quick and easy. Okay, so that's that one. And another thing to keep in mind is that once you click that Reconcile button on the bank rec window, it's final. There's no going back. There's no undo. There's no void option for a Reconcile. So you need to be very certain before you click Reconcile. Deposits do show up as summarized amounts on the bank rec list itself. If you do, let's say, daily deposits for, let's say, maybe a retail store, your deposit could make up quite a few cash receipts. So you just want, if you need to see the detail On a deposit, you can highlight the deposit itself, and you can click to see the information, and it would give you the full list of the individual receipts that are listed on that deposit. And then there's several display and sort options that can make reconciling easier, just so that you can see things maybe by date as opposed to by transaction type. If you prefer transaction type, it will show you all deposits together, then all checks together. That might be an easier way of looking at things. Just a few different varieties, a variety of things that you can use to make life a little bit easier. Another just quick note is that GP does do electronic reconcile. So if your bank has this as an option, it might be something to look into if you have a large number of transactions and bank rec takes up a lot of your time. It's a very easy, once you've got it set up, let me put it that way, it's very easy to use. You simply download a file off of your bank's website and you would import that into the bank. Setting it up is not that simple. So just as a quick note, you can contact us in support, or if you have a favorite GP consultant, you can contact them and ask for assistance in finding out what's involved in setting up electronic reconcile in GP. Okay, so reconciling to GL. This is something that's new for GP 2013. Reconcile to GL itself has been around for quite a few versions. However, it's been mainly for AR and AP. Now, and inventory as well. Now, for 2013, you can actually do this as well for the bank transactions. So this is giving you the link to how to get to the Reconcile to GL form, and then you would simply select your bank reconcile option and your checkbook. And when you process, it generates an Excel sheet. And on one side is going to be the bank information, and the other side is going to have the GL information, and it's going to match as many transactions as it can. And this is the transactions are most easily matched if you enter them from either they're pulling in from the subledgers, or if they're entered manually in the bank transaction entry windows. If you're entering cash transactions through the GL, that will most likely be what shows up as unmatched transactions. It's the primary reason why something wouldn't be matched. And as I showed you in that overview slide, GL does not back up into the bank. It has to go from the bank down to the GL. The other reasons why you would see unmatched transactions is if you have a deposit without a receipt, those don't post to the GL either. That's, remember we mentioned, that's just a manual entry adjustment to the bank itself and does not hit the GL. And also if you have a subledger distribution error, posting date distribution type or distribution amount, those can potentially cause there to be either an entry on the GL that doesn't show on the bank, or an entry in the bank that doesn't show on the GL, depending on what actually happened. So just things to keep in mind. Okay, and on to our demo. We're just getting switched over real fast. Okay, hopefully everybody can see me now. All right, so we're going to start with just going through everything we just spoke about. First, the bank deposits. As you can see, the options are very straightforward. It's simply enter or void. And then as we showed in the screenshot, you have deposits with receipts, deposit without receipts. Then you have these two interesting options, clear unused receipts and deposit EFT. So deposit EFT is if you're using electronic funds transfer options for payables or receivables. Deposit EFT can be used in those cases. They would keep them separate from the general deposit with receipts. Clear unused receipts, that would be if you have a series of receipts that are in the deposit window that are not necessary. They either have been dealt with in some other manner, or they don't need to show up on the bank statement comparison. So you would just click clear unused receipts, and it would just give it a date range, and you can select the ones you just want to clear out. So the primary one that you would use is deposit with receipts. And let's just quickly look at what you would see. So you would select your checkbook. The deposit number auto-populates just like every other transaction number in GP. You can give it a particular description. If we go with our scenario of this being the daily deposits, you would say, maybe give it the date and say daily deposit, and today's date, say 4/22/14, and that would be your description. So then the other thing you can do is you can select receipts by type. So if you only want to see checks at this point, you can select checks. You can even give it a specific date range. Let's do an easy one. Let's do January. There's going to be tons to do on January. 31. And you just simply hit redisplay. Ooh, we don't have anything. Interesting. Okay, so let's say all and just give us something to look at. Okay, so we have receipt type check, and this would give us only checks. And as you can see, there's quite a few in here. It automatically selects everything. However, you can say unmark all and then select only the deposit, only the items that you want to include in the deposit. That way, if you do, you don't have to do this every day or every week. You can backdate and select only what you want. And then once you've selected your deposit, you would hit post, and that would flow through to the bank rec and to the general ledger. So I'm just going to clear this for now. If I post, it's going to try and print a lot of reports, and we don't have time to get through all the reports that it's going to do. Okay, so bank transaction entry. As I said, there's a few options that you can choose. Enter transaction, enter receipt, void transaction, and void receipt. The primary one, again, is going to be enter transaction or enter receipt. The types of transactions you have available are check, withdrawal, increase adjustment, and decrease adjustment. So if you know that the bank requires an increased adjustment or a decreased adjustment to a specific account, you can do that here. This is a perfectly acceptable place to do an adjusting entry. All right, and it will even say it will have its own prefix on the number so that it's easy to identify. If we were to do decrease, it would change and do DAJ instead of IAJ. Okay. And withdrawal also has its own number as well. So let's pull up our checkbook again. So it automatically populates, the checkbook automatically populates what cash account is required. You simply would enter the debit and credit amount and then give it your offset account. So let's say, so this is a withdrawal, so it's going to be $500. I don't think I tried to remove anything, but all right, let's try just entering this here. There we go. Okay, likes that better. So if you enter the amount, it auto-populates into the credit line. Just a note, you would want to put a reference or something into the paid to or description as well, just saying what this is for. That way it's not just a random withdrawal. And then you would simply, most of these are going to be to miscellaneous expense. So let's just grab our miscellaneous expense account. There we go. And that's going to be our offsetting account number. Okay, so let's just say this is withdrawal for plumbing expense. You had some kind of a freak accident in the bathrooms, and they had to call a plumber. Okay. But again, you don't want to add any kind of new vendor or anything like that. So then you would simply post it through, and that would explain what's going on with this particular transaction. Okay? All right. So that's bank transactions. So on to the more unusual ones. Miscellaneous checks. It's not used very often. Like we said, it's probably less than 10% of the time you would use a miscellaneous check. Most of the time you're just going to use payables. It's a nice little format because it just lets you type in a text box for the pay to. So this is going to be whoever, in this particular scenario, let's just say that you bought Girl Scout cookies for the company to have in the break room. So we're going to say Girl Scouts is our pay to. We paid, let's say, $42. And the address, well, in this particular case, is probably going to be not much of an address, but let's just say, for an example, oops, there we go. So it's just like filling out a manual check, a written check, same fields, and you would put down cookies for break room. I want to work there. You'll also notice that because the format is not going to use the same format as your payables checks, if you like automatic signatures, miscellaneous checks is not going to do an automatic signature. The signature line here is going to remain blank and require a manual signature if you were to actually print this out. Also, as you can see, it auto-populated with the miscellaneous expense and the cash account for the amount that we entered. Once you've filled it out, you have two options. You can print check and post, so that would actually physically print to a printer, or you can simply post direct. So if you were filling this out just to track that you made a personal check or something, you could simply post this so that you don't print anything, and it just simply records it in the bank and the GL. Okay, you can also print an alignment form. If you're setting things up and you have formatted check stocks that you're going to be using, you can do an alignment form to help you make sure it's aligning properly and potentially do adjustments to the format. Okay. Yes, I want to continue. I'm sorry, one thing I forgot to mention, I'll use it here. If you've noticed, there's a post option. There is no save option on any of the bank transactions except for deposits. Deposits allow you to save. But everything else in the bank transaction entry and in miscellaneous checks and in transfers, there are no batches. If you post it, it's posted. It's done. That's why they keep giving you the void options, because that's your only recourse. If you mess something up and you need to go back and fix it, you got to void it and redo it. So it's a little harsher than your general ledger journal entry or from the subledger doing a transaction, but just keep it in mind that there are no batches and there's no save and redo. It's post direct. Okay, so last type of transaction is the bank transfer entry itself. As we said, it's just very straightforward entry. You would do a quick description of why you're transferring. It was probably that somebody used the, let's say, wrong cash account. Ooh, my goodness, I can't spell. Cash account used in transaction. Okay, so we would just be transferring the balance. So we're going to say that Uptown Trust was used when petty cash should have been used. So we're going to transfer the amount of $150. And that auto-populates over. So it's a very straightforward window, but the nice thing that you have to keep in mind is the two checkbooks. So it's updating two checkbook registers and will show on two bank recs. All right. Let's clear that and we'll actually show you a bank rec. When you're reconciling bank, it's checkbook specific. We'll use Uptown Trust since it's got so much data in it. what you would do is you would tell it how much the ending balance was on the bank statement and when the bank statement ending and cutoff dates are. Usually those are the same date, but just in case, they do give you the option of putting in the two different numbers or two different dates. Then you just hit transactions, and it's going to ask you if you're sure you want to match deposits by amounts within the 8-day grace period, and you just say yes. And it presents to you all of your transactions given the cutoff date. So here's the sort and the display options that I was mentioning earlier. You can look at just what you have marked so far. We've only done a couple, so not much. Or you can sort by type or by date. I tend to like date, but that is entirely up to the person doing bank rec. If they want to do all of their deposits at one shot and then all of their checks at the next shot, they absolutely can. Another really neat little tool is the select range. You can see these little markers when you highlight a line. It gives you these two brackets. If you select, let's in this case say a deposit, and then you say select range, begin range, it marks that with a little arrow saying that this is the beginning. Think of it as like a parenthesis. And then let's say you're going to do all of your deposits in one shot. You would select the last and say end range, and that marks it with a closing parenthesis. As you can see, it's selecting all of the items within the range that you just set. Then you would come down and say mark, and it goes through and marks all of the items within that range in one shot. If you need to mass undo or mass uncheck, this is the cleared checkbox. You could do it the opposite direction. You could say select begin range, end range, and say unmark. And that lets you get rid of, so if you made a mistake or you got off on your dates or something, you can go back and do a quick clearing or a quick marking of multiple transactions at once instead of having to do them individually, manually. So that's just another nice feature. The other thing I wanted to mention, there were a couple other things. So if we highlight a deposit and if you click number, that's going to pull up the detail and it's going to show you every transaction that's in that deposit. So it's a good way to reference if you feel like something might be missing. You can look at the detail. The other thing that we mentioned on the slides was the adjustments directly in the reconciliation window itself. So you can do a quick one. You can say another expense, or you can put a particular type of adjusting entry that you're doing and just fill it out as a normal transaction. As soon as you hit OK, it's going to populate into the, yes, I know. All right, fine. Apparently I have to do one. So let's just quickly grab our miscellaneous expense again. And do $1. All right. So those are some of the nice additional features of the bank rec. And then just here's the reconcile button. I'm not clicking it because it's going to take a while to do the reports and everything. But again, just as you can see, there's no undo. There's no back out the reconcile. Once you hit reconcile, it confirms all of those transactions, and you can't get rid of them. It's just something to keep in mind. So there's no save on the bank rec selection window, but there is a save here, and that will keep anything that you've done so far on that checkbook. So if you cleared some accounts but you haven't cleared everything, then you just hit save and it keeps what you've done, and you can go back to it later. Okay, last thing I promise, and then we'll try to get to a couple of questions. The Reconcile to GL, and the module is where you would select bank rec, and you tell it which checkbook. So we're going to do our Uptown Trust. And it puts out, it does create an Excel file and it has an output. It saves it to a particular location. The checkbook automatically tells it which cash account is going to be run against the GL. So we would say process. And I'm just going to, hopefully this will run really quickly so that we can get an Excel sheet and see the unmatched versus matched transactions. It's really the final thing I want to show everybody. If you don't have 2013, we can show you a way to use SmartList to produce a bank transaction list and a GL transaction list so that you could export both to Excel and kind of do this, put this together yourself. It wouldn't be quite as nice because it won't do the matched and unmatched for you, but you can kind of work it a similar way with SmartLists. Okay, so as you can see, we have Uptown Trust. So this is the bank side on the left, and on the right is the GL side. So the unmatched transactions, as you can see, there's some journal entry transactions that occurred that used the cash account. These are payable or payments, receipts or payments that did not hit the bank transaction entry. Usually this happens when when the distribution type is incorrect. If a cash account is accidentally put down as a receivables type, not a cash type. Here I can actually quickly show you in, let's say, sales. And if we were to do a cash receipt very quickly, okay. Let's just grab anybody. Okay. We do amount for $500, Town Trust, and we look at our distributions. You can see the distribution type is cash, and the account number is also the cash. But if we were to accidentally switch this and do the receivables there and the cash here, which happens sometimes if you're doing manual distribution adjustments, and then we hit OK, you can see the cash type, which is what tells it to hit the bank, does not match the account number, and so that would actually cause it to show this unmatched. The account number is still there. It's a fine transaction. It works, but it's just going to show up as unmatched, so that would be just something to keep in mind. It would also be possible if you had the cash type, but let's say you were using, you accidentally had maybe 2100 account instead of a payables account. Somehow it got in there wrong. Manual typing again. That could potentially cause it to be an unmatched transaction. So I just wanted to show you that that might be something to look into. The matched transactions are easy. Those are the ones that came through from the subledger. They're the ones that came through the bank. It's only the unmatched transactions that you'd want to keep track of. Okay, that ends our demo and would take us to the questions. Sahara, what are the questions that we've got?
Okay, we have a couple that came in. Megan, if you want to go back to GP just so we could walk through a couple of those screens. So one of our first questions is, on the bank transaction entry window, where do the paid to and description line get documented? Megan, if we could jump back to GP and open up that bank transaction entry window.
Yes. Give me 1 second to get rid of all my little openings. Okay, bank transaction entry window.
So that paid to field and the description field. So the paid to field, actually, that line goes into the bank rec, and the description line goes into the GL. So paid to would be, for example, the Girl Scout cookies, and the description would be the same thing. If you leave both of those fields blank, they will automatically update as bank transactions. So those aren't required fields, but again, good to know.
Yeah, that's a great
One of the other questions is, where can we learn more about miscellaneous checks? Megan, if you want to jump to the miscellaneous checks window. There's actually a really cool feature that not a lot of people know about. On each window, if you go to Help and About this window, what it does is it takes you back to the index that will tell you what each field is, what each of those buttons means, and the process of how to actually enter a miscellaneous check. So that will give you a little bit more information. And again, if you open any window, it's under Help and About this window. One of our next questions is it possible to enter a bank transaction with multiple cash withdrawals and offsetting expenses? Our payroll has ADP checks, direct deposit, and manual checks. I think you can go ahead and actually enter multiple lines. The only problem is if there is an error in one of those lines and you have, I don't know, maybe 15 or 20 lines within one transaction, you will have to do a complete void if a mistake is made. So you can actually enter multiple cash withdrawals within that window. We also have a question regarding the 2010 GP, because it does not have that Reconcile to GL feature. Unfortunately, we do not have enough time to go over that, but we can definitely follow up with instructions for anyone that's on other versions, previous versions of GP 2013, and how to complete that reconcile. So we will follow up on that one.
Okay, great.
Okay, and that is about it.
Okay, I think that wraps up our Q&A session. So if you guys have any more specific questions that come up after seeing this webinar, please feel free to contact Megan or Sahar directly. We'll get their contact information up here in just a second. And then as you exit, there's going to be a quick survey. If you could just take a moment and let us know how we're doing, we'd really appreciate that. And we thank you again for joining us, and we hope you have a great rest of the day. Thanks so much. Take care.
Oh, sorry.
Let's go back to that and end at least on your guys' contact information. And if we can't get it up, that's okay. We'll also be sending out an email again with a recap of this webinar along with the slide deck, and you can respond directly back to that email with your questions. So thanks again and have a great day.